Welcome to yet again another non-Lasker episode of the competitive biography of Emanuel Lasker. If you recall from the start of the Miniati match, we discussed how Lasker had intended to send a challenge out to Joseph Blackburne, arguably considered England's strongest player. And today we're going to have an update on that, so if you'll give me just a moment to yap, we'll get to the chess in a bit. So it took quite some time, but eventually Blackburne did respond to the challenge and said that he would be willing to play for a stake of 50 British pounds per side, or 1,000 German marks. Now, this was an incredibly high sum. Recall that the match with Mises was for only 450 marks a side, so this being more than double and against a much stronger player, it was going to be a tall ask for Lasker to achieve that kind of money. And indeed, all of the reporting at this time says that Lasker was desperately trying to raise the money, but 1,000 German marks was quite a bit. I apologize for the poor quality on this photo. I am at the mercy of the British newspaper archive. Now, unfortunately for Lasker, try as he might, he was not able to raise the money, and after a few weeks, Blackburne had to withdraw his sum under the obligations of his other professional engagements. So that match fell through, but there was still some hope because another master, Mr. Francis Lee, the person sitting aside from Blackburne, also agreed to play a match against Lasker for a much lower sum of only 20 British pounds. So this was a much more achievable figure. Now, details about this particular match are slightly more scarce. Here's the reporting that I'm using, which says that after 3 days of Lee depositing his money and waiting, he received a note from Lasker saying that he had to return to Germany on urgent business, and the match was called off. Now, this, unfortunately, really tarnished Lasker's reputation in England, and he wouldn't return to the country for well over a year. So, unfortunately, that's the end of that discussion. Our next video will be discussing Lasker returning to Germany and what he got up to there, but for now, we have a little bit more chess to cover in this country. So the one good thing to come out of this whole ordeal is that Blackburne and Lee agreed to play a match. Here are the conditions. The spark notes are that it was for 25 pounds a side, 15 moves per hour was the time control, first to 6 wins, with the first 5 draws not counting, but every draw thereafter counting as a half point, which was actually a relatively novel feature of matches at this time. Now, as you can see from below the camera, we're jumping in at game number 9. I'm only going to be showing one game from this match, more of an exercise to show you potentially how Blackburne would have played if he was to engage in a match with Lasker. Let's see how it went. With white, Blackburne opened with e4, and Lee responded with the French defense, e6. Now, Blackburne was considered to be arguably the world's strongest practitioner on the black side of the French defense. So I find it somewhat interesting that Lee chose this defense in every game of the match. Play continued d4, d5, knight to c3, knight to f6, bishop to g5, bishop to e7. When we covered the match against Henry Bird, we explained that he liked to exchange on f6 here. Blackburne's move of e5 is objectively correct, however. The knight retreated back to d7, we exchanged on e7, bishop e7, queen to e7, queen to d2, and a6 from Lee. Now this, I believe, is where the game really starts, as the players played this particular opening 5 times over the course of the match. The main discussion at this point was whether white should play this knight to d1 or to e2. Now, knight to d1 was chosen in game number 5, with the argument that this knight was best placed on the e3 square. So following c5, c3, knight to c6, f4, Lee exchanged in the center, cd4, cd4, f6, knight to f3, knight to b6, and then Blackburne would go on to place this knight on e3. Now, coincidentally, this game would end up in a knight endgame and ultimately be drawn after 53 moves. For this game, Blackburne tested out the knight to e2 system, and following the similar moves, c5, f4, knight to c6, and c3, here Lee played a different move than in the other game. He played f5, a move criticized by most of the authorities of the time, including Steinitz himself, who in his notes wrote that he preferred the f6 break. Now, something of a side objective for this match was to serve as a training opportunity for an upcoming tournament in Manchester in the summer of 1890. Now, Blackburne, as white, actually reached this position in one of those games. His opponent traded on d4, c captures d4, c captures d4, and offered a queen trade with queen to b4. Blackburne let it stand with knight to f3, but after knight to b6, only now he interposed the knight on c3. This would be played against another German master, Theodor von Schieve, with Blackburne winning this game in only 29 moves. But as mentioned, Lee played a little bit more of an unorthodox move in f5, and after knight to f3 and b5, the database I used had knight to g3 come up as a hit. This came up in a game supposedly played in the 1882 New Orleans Chess, Checkers, and Whist Club Championship. I'll leave anyone else to verify that for themselves. Blackburne here played the move h3 instead. This move is a novelty, and so it is as of move 12 that the players are playing a unique game. After knight to b6 from Lee, Blackburne retreated his knight to c1, anticipating this knight hitting c4 so that he could play bishop captures on c4. Now, the question of which pawn to recapture with is actually a very important one. Lee decided to play b captures on c4, which makes sense on principle as you're capturing towards the center. However, for dynamic reasons, it's actually inferior. Here, black really should be playing d captures on c4, creating strong play against white's center. White has a couple of different options. They don't have to take here on c5 right away. If they play a neutral move like castling, then black is going to take. C captures d4, knight captures d4, and they're going to play moves like bishop to b7, activating the usually weak French bishop. They're going to castle, they're fully developed, black is super happy here. So white has the option of playing d captures on c5, and a better move order in this position is for black to castle first, so that they can play rook to d8 with tempo. If white ever castles, then queen captures on c5 comes with check. White can defend the pawn with queen to f2 if they want, and this is a pure pawn sacrifice. But again, black is going to get crazy good development with bishop to b7, the rooks can come to the open file, and they'll have incredible compensation for the pawn with a very active and energetic game to come. But Lee chose b captures on c4, which is again the principal decision. After knight to e2, he of course has to look for counterplay on the b file, so he plays rook to b8, and both players castled. Now, the big difference between these two positions in this game is, as per usual in the French, the quality of the minor pieces. Lee's French bishop remains horrible, and he's made no active efforts to improve it, while both of Blackburne's knights are ready to hit the powerful d4 square, which, as we'll see very quickly, is quite impactful. Blackburne started by playing the move rook to f2, really trying to overprotect his b-pawn. After bishop to d7 from Lee, here Blackburne started going after the d4 square, d captures c5, queen captures c5, and now knight e to d4, and Lee starts doubling on the b file with rook to b7. Of course, he has to seek whatever counterplay he can. Blackburne traded on c6, knight captures c6, bishop captures c6, now the other knight went to d4. Hitting the e6 pawn causes Lee to retreat back with bishop to d7, and now we reach a very interesting position that I think really gives us the most insight into Blackburne's style. Now, if you consult the engine in this position, it immediately wants to strike forward with g4, and I guarantee you this move is on Blackburne's radar. It's why he played h3 all the way back on move 12. But Blackburne, I would say, is among the world's most patient players. He can start this attack literally whenever he wants, and right now he can take time to defend against Lee's queenside activity, which is why he instead played the defensive move in this position, rook to e1. After Lee doubled on the b file with rook f to b8, Blackburne retreated his queen back to c1, so now his rook can lead to the defense for the b-pawn. And after a5, this rook went up to e2, so now the two rooks are defending the b-pawn, and this queen is free to activate itself and join the kingside attack. Now, following Lee pushing this pawn to a4, Blackburne was forced to push this pawn to a3, so now the b-pawn is permanently weak. There is no more pushing of b3 or b4 to liquidate this weakness, but Lee doesn't actually have a way to add more fuel to this fire. Queen to b6 would triple on the b file and would, in theory, add more pressure, but A, the rooks are defending, and B, this pawn is already defended 3 times, so Lee doesn't actually have any way to attack the pawn any further. So with no more active moves to make, Lee plays the move king to h8, and finally Blackburne begins his attack by pushing g4. Now, one immediate problem that black faces is that they never really have the option to take here. If f captures g4, h captures g4, there's nothing black can do to stop white from pushing f5, and if they don't take here, then it might even go to f6. This will break open black's defenses and they'll be completely cooked. So Lee instead decided to fortify this pawn with g6, but now we see the queen really getting into the game with queen to e3, threatening knight captures on f5, which would simply win a pawn due to the discovery. So Lee sensibly retreated his queen back to e7, and now Blackburne went rook to g2. Now, all of the annotators of the day thought that Blackburne was trying to look for play on the g file, which isn't necessarily incorrect, but this really influenced their analysis in ways that it shouldn't have. For example, Steinitz likes f captures on g4 here, but again, after h captures on g4, the g file is somewhat irrelevant. It's really the f file where everything's happening. f5 is still going to come, and because of the pawn on g6, the move is actually even stronger, so this would still be a complete non-starter for black. If you ask the engine, it gives rook to f8 as the best plan, but really this only makes sense if you fully understand the tactic that Blackburne is setting up. Lee ultimately decided on rook to g8, which again makes sense if you believe that Blackburne is primarily looking for play on the g file, but unfortunately this misses the tactic, and now this mistake brings the game from bad to borderline losing. Now Blackburne did take on f5, g captures f5. If you respond with e captures on f5, then the problem is e6. This pawn is protected 3 times, so you're certainly not taking it. And once this bishop retreats, white's going to play queen to e5 with check, take the d pawn, and black's position is going to crumble. So Li instead played g captures on f5, and after rook captures g8, king captures g8, rook to g2 check. If he played the move king to f8, then the tactics might have been avoided, but kings in the center with queens on the board is always a dangerous prospect. So Li instead played king to h8, but he has more problems with this king being stuck in the corner. So there are tactics abound. What I want you to do, pause the video, see if you can find the move that Blackburne has at his disposal here to really start putting this game away. There are a whole bunch of moves that keep the advantage, but only one really decisively puts Li to the sword. All right, 3, 2, 1. The absolute best move is always to sacrifice knight captures on f5. This is what Blackburne played, and it's an absolutely beautiful move. If e captures on f5, then e6 still works. This pawn isn't protected enough, so yes, the bishop can take on e6, but now queen to e5 check, and the problem is that the king is boxed in. Black has to give up the queen with queen to g7. And after rook captures g7, rook captures g7 does come with check, but it's simply king to f2. The rook and the bishop are in general less powerful than the queen. Once this bishop moves, then one of these pawns is going to fall, and again, white's simply going to be up material. They're going to have at least one passed pawn, and this game is going to be over very shortly. So Li retreated his attacked queen back to f8, but Blackburne continued going forward with knight to d6. This kicked the rook back to b8, and now queen to a7 even, hitting the bishop. Now, there are so many problems that black faces here. This bishop can't actually be defended. If you play the move rook to d8, then queen to c7 actually is a fork. You hit both of these pieces. If the rook is taken, then the queen can't retake because of knight to f7 check. So Li instead played rook to e8. He gave up the bishop, queen captures on d7, and tried to trap it with rook to e7. But unfortunately for him, Blackburne simply played queen to c8. This black queen is pinned, and obviously if white is up a piece, then a queen trade will leave black in a horrible endgame. So it was here on move 36 that Francis Li resigned the game. So hopefully you enjoyed this little side quest of sorts as we explore the playing style of England's best player. For those curious, Blackburne would go on to win this match 6-3. Very good result, and honestly not a horrible result for Li either, who is a relatively inexperienced player just at the start of his master career, so no bad results here. So in the next video, we'll be returning to Lasker and we'll be going over his next exploits in Germany. I look forward to seeing you there. Until then.